Hi, everyone. Today, what we're going to do is conclude chapter 7 on emotions. And in doing so, we'll start to get into more of the performative aspects of emotions compared to what we did last class, kind of looking at those different social dimensions of emotions. So, again, we recognize that foundationally speaking, emotions are strongly connected to physiology, to bodily reactions. But the same coin, but on the other side, we can say there's a large social dimension to emotions as well. And typically, we miss these social aspects of emotions because emotions are so personal to us. We really don't see that social nature involved. So just to recap briefly, what we did last class, looking at that first half of the chapter, basically we can say that we're looking at different social connections, emotions connecting to the social environment, the environment in which we find ourselves provide us different feeling rules, how we're expected or not expected to feel in a given situation. And also we can recognize in these environments, we're socialized in terms of learning what is emotionally appropriate or not. Again, we're not born with this idea of what is inappropriate, what is appropriate, emotionally speaking. We have to learn those ideas in socialization. So another connection we talked about was connecting emotions to relationships. So basically, emotions can fluctuate in terms of one's power and one's status in a given relationship. So as long as you're kind of getting the proper um, kind of reactions that you expect to get from other people. So if you have a lot of power, you expect the people to react to you in terms of obedience, in terms of listening to you. And when you get those reactions, then you should be emotionally calm. But when people who perhaps are underneath you, they don't listen to you, they're not obeying you. That's when you can foster those negative emotions. And a similar idea with status. You have a certain status, and when that status is kind of recognized properly, then you're going to feel okay. But on the other hand, if you feel like somebody is not recognizing you properly, disrespecting you perhaps, then that's where that kind of negative emotion can foster within the individual. So the third connection we talked about was looking at how emotions connect both to personal and social identities. So here we're talking about how we expect ourselves to act in accordance to those feeling rules. So we may not kind of feel the way we're supposed to feel, but we're going to kind of act that way anyways, because we kind of hold ourselves accountable often for living up to norms and expectations. And we'll get into more of that kind of acting, performative aspect today. And then, the same thing with others. You expect others to kind of act within a given situation according to those feeling rules, the emotion rules attached to the situation itself. And so, when everything kind of occurs as expected, then again, emotionally speaking, we feel okay and we've done our part. And then, emotionally speaking, the situation kind of goes smoothly. But on the other hand, if we kind of feel a way that we're not supposed to feel in a given situation, then that can cause a little bit of that, psychological tension. In other words, sometimes, people find that when something bad happens to other people, they may feel kind of happy for some strange reason. But often, when you kind of get that reaction of happiness when somebody is going through something, bad, we kind of feel guilty about that. And so, I shouldn't feel happy. That's not how you're supposed to feel, in this situation. And the same thing for other people. If you see other people kind of acting emotionally inappropriately, and then you get that kind of psychological tension in yourself, and you kind of look at them differently as being kind of abnormal, being deviant. We'll come back to these ideas later on today. So when looking at the chapter, the rest of the chapter for today, basically, we're looking at how we're doing emotions, how we not only kind of feel emotions, but we perform them, we do them in reference to those feeling rules and role expectations too. And we can separate the two. And an example to do this would be looking at a funeral. So there's been some interesting symbolic interactions and work done on funerals as a performance. So, we have your backstage and your front stage areas and kind of what goes on and what doesn't go on in those spaces. So, nevertheless, you can understand kind of the performative aspect of a funeral and the backstage front sides elements. But also, there's emotional elements involved in funerals. And, the feeling rules basically, if it's, kind of the traditional funeral, it's expected that you're going to kind of feel sad. It's expected that people are going to be displaying those kind of soft emotions. But not everybody is supposed to be doing that. So you have certain people, at the funeral, such as the funeral director and other kind of workers for the funeral. So they have their kind of different roles and expectations attached to those roles. So while kind of the those in attendance are supposed to kind of be feeling one way, and these individuals who are actually working the funeral are not supposed to be crying. They're not supposed to be really showing these soft emotions to a certain degree. They're supposed to be displaying sorrow, but again, they're not supposed to be kind of bawling, crying, because in that role, they have different expectations in terms of how they're supposed to feel and how they're not. So, a lot of this kind of doing, performing emotions connects to the idea of emotional management. And this is something we briefly touched on earlier in the semester, and we're going to unpack a little bit further today. So, when you look at emotion management, you can kind of break it down into two different concepts. The concept of emotion work. And emotion work is simply the work you put in to match your emotions to the social expectations of how you're expected to feel. And so this involves a couple things. It involves sometimes trying to suppress, how you really feel, and then other times it involves projecting certain emotional states that are not really there. So, as I talk about in your paper three guidelines, basically I ask you to illustrate, in a given situation where you've projected insincere feelings. You've laughed when you've not really thought something was funny, or you told somebody you're feeling well when actually you're not feeling well. And then, on the other hand, I ask you to look at when you suppress certain feelings. So, you want to laugh, but it's inappropriate to laugh in a given situation. Or, you want to be happy, but again, it's inappropriate to be happy in a situation. So rather than projecting something, you're kind of suppressing something. And the two often, work together. If you really want to, laugh, you suppress that feeling and you kind of project a different feeling of being calm or being perhaps upset or something like that when you're really not feeling calm or upset. So that's how you can look at emotion work: suppressing things that are real but would be considered inappropriate, and then projecting things that are insincere but will be considered appropriate in a given situation. So, looking at an emotional labor is basically the effort that you put in trying to suppress, trying to suppress the real feelings and trying to project the insincere feelings. And so, basically, it's kind of the work you put in. And this is often invisible work. You know, typically you think that the teacher is always happy, so you're surprised to learn that a lot of it's just an act. The teacher is not happy 24/7 with the kids. And a lot of research has been done on flight attendants. Flight attendants are always happy to serve you, or aren't always happy to greet you when you get on the plane, but they have to do that emotion work. And we say, it's part of the job that goes unseen, and often it goes unpaid. You really don't think it's work. You really don't think it's labor, so you don't think to pay somebody more for doing it. But nevertheless, you can say that it's connected to time factors as well. So, a lot of this has to do with, more kind of consumption related jobs. So if you're in the service industry, if you worked at restaurants, as a waiter, if if you worked at a store, as a clerk, usually at the beginning of the day, often the emotional work is not as much in the sense that you can project these feelings pretty easily at the beginning of the day, the first flight, the first customer, but then you get to later on in the day or, the rush, during a busy period of the day and then you kind of start to feel differently. And there's a lot more kind of labor involved in projecting those emotions that are not really there, a lot more work involved in kind of suppressing the emotions that are really there. So, you can say that, often this is connected to time. At the beginning of the day, you typically are doing things much easier, but at the end of the day, you really have to put in the labor, the work. So we can break this into kind of that front stage, backstage that we brought up a few times this semester. And basically, I'll start with the front stage. It's where you are doing the emotional work kind of in front of people and they can see you. And so here I just use the example of a nurse interacting with a patient. And so the nurse is going to be, you know, displaying concern, displaying, sympathy, empathy with his or her patient. And that's kind of going on, together in that front stage area. But, we can also recognize kind of more backstage kind of preparation when it comes to emotional work. And so here, the nurse would be, in his office and he'd be preparing to kind of go and meet the patient, or the nurse would be in her office and she'd be preparing to you know give somebody bad news, and as a result of giving somebody bad news, you want to come across as you know feeling appropriately in that given situation. So here again, you kind of get yourself up, not only mentally speaking, to do your job of providing information to the patients, but also to do the emotional side of your job and follow those feeling rules. And so often you can't just do it on the fly. So you need a little backstage time to get yourself ready to go out and do it on the front stage. And so we can finally kind of look at how emotions have kind of creeped their way into other forms of research, such as social deviance and social movements. Two topics we're going to get into shortly later on in the semester. So overall, we're looking at how social deviance. We think about how somebody's kind of thinking and acting in ways that we consider to be abnormal, deviant. So that's part of it. But again, kind of the other side of the coin is the emotional dimension of deviance. So here we're talking about, is there, behind your deviant thoughts, behind your deviant acts, is there any sense of guilt? Is there any sense of remorse involved in the action? So again, kind of going back to that idea of you're happy when something wrong goes on for other people. you know do you feel guilt? Do you feel kind of remorse? And that would be emotionally, you're kind of normal, because that's, you should feel that sense of guilt, you should feel that remorse. But then on the other hand, if you're kind of thinking and acting inappropriately, and those inappropriate thoughts and actions don't carry guilt or remorse, that kind of takes your deviance to another level. So again, kind of a new area of research within deviance, recognizing the cognitive aspect of it, the thinking, the acting, but also recognizing the emotional aspects as well. Where's the guilt? Where's the remorse? Where is the lack of guilt or remorse? And so social movements as well. So if you're looking at a social movement, usually we kind of highlight that cognitive side again. So, you're interested in something in terms of you have a cognitive connection, but to really get you involved in a social movement, to get you out there and volunteering, um, campaigning, protesting, you don't only have to have an interest in it, because a lot of people have interest in these items, these issues, but you also need that emotional connection as well. And so the question becomes, are you emotionally invested in an issue? And so, it's one thing to have that cognitive connection with an issue. You believe that the environment needs to be taken care of. But it's another thing to have that emotional connection to the issue as well, where emotionally you're invested. And when the two come together, that's going to promote the action more so that, yeah, like I'm interested in it, but I really don't go out and do anything about it. But when you have that emotional dimension, both sides of the coin are there. That's going to promote the actual behaviors more so if you only have the cognitive and you're lacking the emotional connection. So again, what we did today is basically look at kind of the performative aspects of emotions, recognizing the social elements, but also recognizing how often we're kind of doing the action, we're doing these performances in relation to emotions as well. So I'll leave that there for today. Next time, we'll kind of continue to switch our topics and we'll be getting into the topic of deviance. So, kind of breaking down deviance in terms of symbolic interactionism, but also kind of recognizing we can look at two different elements of deviance, the cognitive one as well as the emotional one.